Judge Isaac Parker knew they'd be there in 3 days. Bass Reeves knew it in 2. But what the 5 Klansmen didn't understand was simple. When the judge who hanged criminals like laundry drying in the sun showed up in your territory, alongside the deadliest black marshal in the West, you didn't have 3 days. You didn't have 2. You had hours. And by the time you realized Bass Reeves was in your town, you were already in cuffs, humiliated, and on the road to Fort Smith in chains. May 14, 1878, the Oklahoma Frontier Indian Territory, a place so wild that federal law had effectively abandoned it years earlier. 75,000 square miles with no order and no justice. It was paradise for outlaws, killers, cattle thieves, and men in white hoods who believed terror was their birthright. But that was about to change, because at 6 that morning, 2 men rode into the settlement of Canadian Station, bringing the federal government with them. One was a U.S. judge with a reputation for sending men to the gallows so fast the carpenters couldn't build scaffolds quickly enough. The other was a 6'2" former slave who had arrested more than 300 criminals in 3 years and could shoot with both hands so accurately that hardened outlaws often preferred to surrender rather than face him. Isaac Parker and Bass Reeves had just arrived in Oklahoma, and the clock for 5 members of the Klan had started counting down. Parker wasn't an ordinary judge. When President Grant appointed him in 1875 to run the U.S. District Court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, with authority over all of Indian Territory, most people assumed it was a death sentence. No judge had ever controlled that region. Criminals operated openly, and marshals who entered often ended up dead in ditches or hanging from trees. Parker lasted 2 weeks before he hanged his first criminal, then 5 more, then 12, and in his first year he sent 86 men to the gallows, not out of cruelty, but because necessity was the only language the frontier understood. But Parker also knew something other judges missed. To control Indian Territory, a harsh bench wasn't enough. You needed marshals who were deadlier, smarter, and more determined than the men they hunted. That's why he chose Bass Reeves. Reeves had been born enslaved in 1838 in Arkansas, owned by George Reeves, a man who used him, beat him, and believed Bass was property for life, until Bass, at 14, broke his owner's nose in a fight and escaped into Indian Territory. Bass spent years among the Creek and Seminole, learning to track, to shoot, and to move through the land like he was part of it. When the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, he came out changed. He spoke multiple native languages and could follow a 3-week-old trail like it was 3 hours fresh. Parker hired him in 1875, handed him a badge, 2 Colt 45 South, and a territory the size of a small country. Bass Reeves started cleaning up Oklahoma 1 criminal at a time, and by May 1878, he was already a legend. In the last 6 months alone, Bass had arrested 4 men connected to the Klan assault, cattle theft, attempted murder, and every time he brought a white prisoner into Fort Smith in chains, he felt the stares and heard the whispers. The Klan in Oklahoma wasn't one big gang. It was cells, small groups meeting at night, burning crosses, intimidating freedmen, threatening settlers who traded with black people or native people. They left no names, no witnesses, and when one of theirs got arrested, the rest started moving. Bass didn't wait for trouble to reach him. Bass Reeves arrived first. So when Judge Parker said they had intelligence that 5 Klansmen were operating near Canadian Station, planning to intimidate the Henderson family, a freedman family who had legally bought land, Bass didn't wait for orders or reinforcements. Before dawn, he rode with Parker to Canadian Station, a frontier cluster of 20 buildings, a saloon, a general store, a stable. No escort, no announcement, just 2 men with federal badges and enough authority to take half the territory if needed. Bass dismounted at the saloon, because in a small town, somebody always knows. Inside, 3 men were drinking whiskey at 6 in the morning, never a good sign. and one of them saw Bass's badge, went pale, and slipped out the back. The other two stared down at their glasses like they'd found religion. Bass didn't draw a gun or raise his voice. He spoke calmly, like a man who was going to get answers either way. "I'm looking for 5 men. They arrived 2 days ago. They plan to visit the Henderson farm tonight. If you know where they are, you tell me now. If you don't, you point me to someone who does. And if you lie, I'll arrest you for obstructing federal justice." The bartender swallowed hard, glanced at the room, and then at Parker as the judge stepped in black suit, cold eyes, the look of a man who'd hanged 86 men without losing sleep. "They're in the abandoned barn, 3 miles north. Came in last night. Said they were going to teach the Hendersons a lesson." Bass nodded. "Perfect. If they move before I get there, you'll know who warned them, and then you and I will have a very different conversation." Outside, Bass confirmed it to Parker. 5 men, 3 miles north, abandoned barn. Parker offered reinforcements, but Bass refused. More people meant more chances someone tipped them off. They rode out at 7:15 across open land. No cover and no place to hide. Bass carried 2 loaded Colts and a Winchester on the saddle. Parker carried his revolver and the certainty that anyone they arrested would face his court before the month ended. At 7:30, the barn came into view. Old wood, roof sagging, 3 horses tied outside, 2 guards at the entrance. Bass read it instantly organized, but not professional, and 5 men total. They dismounted 100 meters out and split without a word. Parker circling west to cut off escape. Bass going straight in. Bass approached with his hands visible, no weapon drawn. Just a black man walking across open ground, like he belonged there, because he did. The guards spotted him at 50 meters, muttered to each other, and one half drew his revolver before thinking better of it. At 20 meters they tensed. The larger guard stepped forward and barked. "Get out of here, boy. This ain't your territory." Bass kept coming. "I'm looking for 5 men planning to burn the Henderson farm tonight. If that's you, you're under arrest. If it's not, tell me where they are." The 2 men exchanged a look and laughed, the kind of laugh that means they've decided to kill someone. The bigger guard drew his revolver. "You ain't arresting nobody. You're going to leave or you're going to die right here. Decide." Bass stopped at 10 meters, slowly raised his badge, and let them read it. U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves. You've got 3 seconds to drop your weapons and get on your knees. 3, 2. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe, because what happens next is exactly why Bass Reeves became a legend. The big guard lifted his gun and started to squeeze the trigger, but he never finished. Bass drew both Colts so fast it looked impossible. 2 shots, 2 hits one man's shoulder, the other man's hand, and both guards went down screaming as their weapons flew. Bass sprinted for the barn as the door burst open and 3 men poured out with rifles. He dove behind a wooden trough. Bullets chewed the wood inches from his head. He reloaded in seconds, leaned out, fired 3 times, and 1 rifleman dropped while the other 2 stumbled back inside. From the rear of the building, Parker shouted, "Federal Marshals, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up, or we'll drag you out with gunfire." Inside came frantic voices, then a panicked shot through a side window. Bass rose, walked to the doorway with both pistols aimed, and counted down in a voice like steel. 10, 9, 8. Before he reached 4, weapons came out, first 3 rifles thrown into the dirt, 2 revolvers after them, then hands, then 4 men stepping out slow, terrified, defeated. Bass cuffed them one by one, chains linking wrists, and spoke like he was explaining the obvious. "You were going to burn a house tonight. You were going to threaten a family and run them off land they bought legally, land protected by federal law. You thought you could do it because you were 5 white men with hoods and torches against a black family with no protection. You are wrong." He finished, stood, and looked all 5 in the eye. That family has protection. They have the federal government. They have Judge Parker, and they have me. They walked the 3 miles back to Canadian Station in silence. 5 Klansmen chained, bleeding, humiliated. 2 guards wounded, one with a shattered shoulder, one missing fingers. The others unharmed, but shaken. Bass followed behind with his Colts ready, badge flashing in the sun. When they reached town around 9, the streets filled, people pouring out to see what they'd never seen before. Klansmen who terrorized the region marching in chains behind a black marshal and a federal judge. Parker organized transport in minutes. A reinforced wagon, 2 additional marshals, supplies for the 3-day trip to Fort Smith. The prisoners were loaded like cattle, chained tighter, leg irons locked, no chance to run. Before leaving, Parker addressed the town without theatrics, just calm authority. The territory was under federal jurisdiction. The law was not a suggestion, and any man, white, black, or native, who committed crimes here would answer to his court. Then he pointed to the wagon. Look at those 5 men. They believed they were untouchable. They were wrong. The trip to Fort Smith took 3 days. The prisoners arrived filthy, exhausted, broken, and Parker processed them, personally reviewing each charge, hearing testimony, examining the evidence Bass had gathered. When he finally sentenced them, the number hit like a hammer. 15 years in federal prison each, no reduction. They shouted, protested, claimed injustice, claimed Bass had lied. Parker struck the gavel once, the crack like a gunshot. In my courtroom there are 2 kinds of men, those who respect the law and those who break it. You chose to break it. Now you will pay. Afterward, Parker looked at Bass and said, Good work, Marshal Reeves. Bass answered, I'm just doing my job, Your Honor. Parker stepped down closer, voice lower and sharper. No, Marshal, you're making history. Every time you arrest men who believe they're above the law, every time you prove a badge in the right hands is stronger than any hood you prove justice doesn't see color. It sees crime and punishment. Bass Reeves served 32 years as a federal marshal, arrested more than 3,000 criminals, and killed 14 men in the line of duty. Every death justified, every arrest documented, every prisoner delivered. And after that morning in May 1878, after the story spread that Bass Reeves and Judge Parker rode into Oklahoma and put 5 Klansmen in chains in under 3 hours, something shifted. Outlaws still ran, criminals still hid, but the men in white hoods got more careful because they learned the simple rule. You can terrorize the defenseless in the dark until the badge shows up at your door. When Bass Reeves rides into your town, when that federal badge gleams, when that black marshal with 2 Colts looks you dead in the eye and tells you you're under arrest, you have 2 options. Surrender or find out why Bass Reeves never lost a prisoner and why 14 men chose to fight instead of giving up. Bad choice. Every one of them. Subscribe if you liked the video. Because Bass Reeves' story is only beginning, leave a comment telling me if you already knew his story, or if this is the first time you've heard of the most lethal marshal of the Old West. And turn on notifications, because next week we'll tell the story of how Bass Reeves arrested his own son for murder, and what happened in that courtroom will break your heart and earn your respect forever. Because what happened after that arrest changed Oklahoma forever. And what the Klan tried to do in retaliation ended up being their biggest mistake. June 3rd, 1878, 3 weeks after the arrest. Bass Reeves was in Fort Smith writing reports when a messenger rode in on horseback from Canadian Station. The man could barely breathe. He'd ridden for 2 days without stopping. The message was simple and terrifying. The Henderson family, the family Bass had protected, was gone. Their house had been burned to the ground, and in the middle of the ashes, driven into the earth, stood a charred wooden cross. Bass read the message twice, not because he didn't understand it, because he was calculating. Distances, time, possibilities. The 5 men he'd arrested were in prison, but the Klan wasn't 5 men. It was a network. One cell fell, another activated. And now they'd hit the very family Bass had sworn to protect. Parker stepped into the office while Bass was checking his Colts. The judge saw the look on Bass's face and immediately knew something had shifted. It wasn't just determination anymore. It was colder than that. More dangerous. "The Hendersons," Bass said without looking up. "Gone. House burned." Parker closed the door behind him. "How many men do you need?" Bass finished inspecting his weapons. "None, Your Honor. I'm doing this alone. Marshal Reeves, if there's a full cell operating, you need backup." Bass raised his eyes. They were iron. "With respect, Your Honor, backup will only alert them. I need speed. I need surprise. And I need them to have no idea I'm coming until they're already on the ground." Parker studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have a week. If you're not back in a week, I send an entire regiment." Bass was already at the door. "I won't need a week, Your Honor. This ends in 3 days." He rode out that same afternoon alone. No extra supplies. No fallback plan. Just Bass, his 2 horses, his weapons, and absolute certainty. The Hendersons were alive. They had to be. If the Klan had killed them, they would have left the bodies as a warning. Burning the house and leaving a cross meant something else. A message, intimidation, a promise that they could touch the people he protected. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Because now it wasn't just work. Now it was personal. Bass reached Canadian Station at dusk on the 2nd day. He didn't ride into town. He stayed on the outskirts, watching. The town looked normal. Too normal. The saloon was busy. The store still open. People walking the streets like nothing had happened. But Bass could feel it. The fear, the tension, that heavy silence when everyone knows something terrible and nobody dares to speak. He waited until midnight, then moved not toward town, but toward the Henderson ruins 3 miles east. When he arrived, what he saw confirmed it. The house was completely destroyed, walls collapsed, roof charred. But Bass wasn't staring at the wreckage. He was staring at the ground around it. Tracks, lots of tracks. Bass knelt, struck a match, let it flare for a heartbeat, and studied the marks in the dirt. 12 horses, maybe 15. They'd come from the west, stayed about an hour, burned the place, then headed south. And there were other prints, 2 smaller, civilian shoes, a woman, 2 children. The Hendersons, walking, not running, not dragged walking, which meant they were alive when they were taken. Hostages. Bass killed the match and followed the trail. South deeper territory, more isolated. Perfect to hide hostages. Perfect to set a trap. Because Bass knew exactly what they were doing. They hadn't taken the Hendersons to kill them. They'd taken them as bait to lure him out, ambush him, and kill him far from witnesses, judges, and civilization. A message to any other black marshal who thought he could arrest white men without consequences. Bass smiled in the dark, the wolf smile that showed up when his enemies thought they had the advantage. Let them believe it's an ambush, he thought. Let them prepare. Because what they didn't understand was simple. You can't trap a man who already knows where every wire, every spring, every trigger is. And Bass Reeves had been dodging traps since he was 14. He tracked all night. The prints led into creek country rocky hills, dense forest, hard ground. At 4 a.m, he found the first sentry. A man on a high rock, rifle across his lap, half asleep. Bass passed within 3 yards without making a sound. The sentry never knew he was there. A mile ahead, a second sentry, this one awake, alert, watching the trail. Bass didn't take the trail. He circled east, climbed the rocks, and slipped over the man like a shadow. By dawn, Bass found the camp, a small valley ringed by hills. 15 men, 3 tents, a central fire. And at the edge of camp, tied to a tree, the Hendersons. Thomas Henderson, his wife Mary, and their 2 children, alive, terrified, but unharmed. Bass watched from the hills. 15 against 1 bad odds. Impossible if you went in head-on. But Bass didn't fight head-on. Bass fought smart. He waited until midday, when the heat wore them down. Some men slept, others played cards. Only 2 were actively watching. Then Bass moved not toward the camp, but toward the horses. 20 horses were tied on the west side of the valley, with no direct guard. The clansmen trusted their sentries, trusted that no one could get close unseen. Bass slipped in and cut the ropes on 15 horses in 2 minutes quietly. He didn't spook them, didn't scatter them yet. He just freed them, then moved east toward the tree where the Hendersons were tied. He came in from behind so silently, Mary Henderson almost screamed when she felt his hand on her shoulder. Bass gently covered her mouth and whispered, "I'm Marshal Reeves. I'm getting you out, but you need to trust me and stay quiet." Thomas recognized him. His eyes filled with relief, and he nodded. Bass cut the ropes one by one. The Hendersons were free, but they didn't move. Bass pointed north, to a narrow route through the rocks hidden from the camp. "When I say go, you run for those rocks. Don't look back. Don't stop. Run until you can't hear anything from this camp. I'll find you afterward," Mary whispered. "And what are you going to do?" Bass checked his Colts. "Make sure nobody follows." Thomas grabbed his arm. "There are 15 men, Marshal. That's suicide." Bass smiled. "Not if they don't know I'm here until it's too late. Get ready. In 30 seconds, this camp is going to explode." Bass slipped back toward the horses, raised his revolver, and fired 3 shots into the air. The horses erupted, 20 animals panicking, bolting in every direction. The camp snapped awake instantly, men shouting, running for the herd, trying to control chaos. And in that exact moment, Bass shouted to the Hendersons, "Go!" They ran. Bass covered them from the rocks. The clansmen finally noticed the hostages escaping. 3 men sprinted for the tree. Bass stopped them with 4 shots. 2 down hard, 1 hit in the leg, 1 in the shoulder. He didn't kill them. Not yet. The Hendersons vanished into the rock safe. That was part 1. Now came part 2. The remaining 12 regrouped and finally understood. This wasn't an accident. It was an attack, and the attacker was in the hills. Their leader, a big man with a gray beard, started barking orders. "Find that son of a bitch. Sweep the hills. I want him dead before sundown." They split 6 east, 6 west, trying to encircle Bass. Solid tactic. If Bass stayed put, they'd find him. But Bass didn't stay put. He moved fast and silent south. The eastern group lost him. The western group crossed the spot he'd been in 3 minutes earlier. They met in the middle, confused. And then Bass hit them from behind. 2 shots, 2 men down. The other 10 spun and fired toward the sound. Bass was already gone. 20 yards north, he fired twice again, 2 more hits. Panic spread. They couldn't see him, couldn't track him. It was like fighting a ghost. The leader yelled, "Regroup, back to camp, defensive formation." The 8 remaining men ran back and dug in behind rocks, trees, gear rifles aimed in every direction, waiting. Bass let them wait. 1 hour, 2. The sun dropped lower. They got jumpy. One whispered, "Maybe he left. Maybe he only wanted the Hendersons." The leader spat. "Don't be an idiot. That's Bass Reeves. He doesn't leave without finishing the job." He was right. At 6 in the evening, Bass spoke from the rocks, calm, clear, fearless. "Use Marshals. You're surrounded. Drop your weapons and come out with your hands up. You get 1 chance to live. 1. The leader laughed bitterly. "You're one man, Reeves. We ain't surrounded by anything." Bass fired. The bullet slammed a rock inches from the leader's head. "Now you're 7. Want to bet? I can make it 5 before dark." Silence. Then the youngest man dropped his rifle and stood up with his hands raised. The leader screamed, "If you move, you're a dead man." The young man kept walking. "I'd rather do prison than die out here for your stupid pride." He reached Bass. Bass cuffed him without taking his eyes off the others and pushed him toward the rocks. "Walk north. Don't stop. In 2 miles you'll find the Henderson family. Stay with them." The young man disappeared. Now there were 6. Bass called again. 6 against 1, you're losing. You can die here or face Judge Parker. Choose. Another man dropped his weapon. Then another. Within 5 minutes, 4 men walked out with their hands up. Bass cuffed them all, chained them, and sent them north. 2 left. The leader and his second dug in behind rocks, armed, desperate. Bass waited until full dark, then moved not toward them, but back to their camp. He grabbed a torch from the dying fire, lit it bright, carried it to their position, and planted it in the ground, flooding the area with light. Then he spoke from the darkness. "Now I can see you perfectly. You can't see me. You have 10 seconds to surrender, or I start shooting. And I won't miss. 10, 9, 8. At 5 seconds, guns flew out from behind the rocks. Then hands. Then 2 men defeated, broken, humiliated. Bass cuffed them, the last ones. 15 men had taken the Henderson family. 15 had planned to ambush Bass Reeves. And now all 15 were disarmed and in custody, except one who had fled in the initial chaos. But Bass had his name, his description, and knew exactly where to find him later. Bass gathered the prisoners in camp, sat them in a circle, and chained them together like livestock. Then he spoke with the same calm voice he'd used all day. "You thought you could take hostages. You thought you could lure me into a trap. You thought 15 against 1 was enough. You were wrong, not because I'm faster, not because I shoot better, but because you fought with hate, and I fought with purpose. You wanted to send a message. I had to save a family. And when you fight for something bigger than your ego, you win." 3 days later, Bass Reeves rode into Fort Smith with 14 prisoners chained in 2 wagons and the Henderson family safe on recovered horses. The whole town came out into the streets. Word had spread again. The black marshal had rescued hostages. Alone. Against 15 men. And he'd brought 14 back alive to face justice. Parker waited on the courthouse steps. He looked at Bass, the wagons full of prisoners, the Henderson family unharmed. "I said a week, Marshal Reeves. You're back in 4 days." Bass dismounted. "With respect, Your Honor, 3 days to find and arrest them. 1 extra day to make sure the Hendersons had somewhere safe to stay." Parker gave that rare smile only when he was genuinely impressed. 14 men, Marshal. 14 alone." Bass shrugged. 15, Your Honor. 1 ran. "I've got his name. I'll bring him next week." Parker shook his head. "Remarkable. Simply remarkable." The 14 prisoners were processed over the following days. Everyone testified. Everyone confessed. They had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. And when Parker sentenced them, his voice rolled through the courtroom like thunder. Kidnapping, arson, conspiracy, attempted murder of a federal officer, 20 years each. The screams filled the room, protests, threats. Parker struck his gavel once. Deputies dragged the 14 men out. And as they disappeared toward federal prison, Parker stepped down from the bench and approached Bass. "Marshal Reeves, in my 6 years as judge, I've seen extraordinary marshals. I've seen brave men face impossible situations and walk away victorious. But what you did rescuing hostages alone against 15 armed men in hostile territory, that isn't just courage. It's something else. Tactical genius." Bass shook his head. "I only did my job, Your Honor." "No," Parker said firmly. "You did far more than your job. You proved something men like them will never understand. Intelligence beats hate. Strategy beats numbers. A man with purpose will always defeat a mob in odes. And every time you bring men like them before my court, every Time you prove neither the color of your skin nor their hatred can stop you. You're building something bigger than arrests. You're building a legacy. The story of Bass Reeves and the rescue of the Hendersons spread across the territory like fire in dry prairie. Newspapers printed it. Marshals told it in saloons. Black children heard it from their parents and dared to dream that one day they might wear a badge too. Something changed in Oklahoma after that. The Klan didn't vanish. Hate didn't end. But they learned caution, because now they knew Bass Reeves didn't just arrest criminals. He hunted them, out-hawked them, beat them at their own game. And if you tried hostages, traps, or ambushes, you accomplished only one thing: becoming his next prisoner. Bass Reeves served 32 years as a U.S. Marshal. He arrested more than 3,000 criminals. Only 14 died, everyone justified, everyone given a chance to surrender. And after June 1878, no member of the Klan ever again tried taking hostages to lure Bass Reeves in. They learned the lesson the hard way. You don't kidnap people Bass Reeves protects. You don't set traps for Bass Reeves. And you definitely don't bet 15 against one thinking numbers will buy victory, because Bass Reeves doesn't count men. He counts advantages. And in any fight where he chooses the ground, controls the time, and dictates the rules, numbers mean nothing. That's the difference between a mob and a professional, between hate and purpose, between men who fight to feel superior and a man who fights because it's right. That difference built the West, not gunslingers, not outlaws, but marshals like Bass Reeves, who understood that real strength doesn't come from how many men you have. It comes from why you're fighting. And Bass Reeves always knew why. For the Henderson family and thousands like them. For the idea that the law must protect everyone, and to prove that a man born enslaved could stand before criminals and make them kneel to justice. That was his legacy. That's why his story matters. And that's why when Isaac Parker and Bass Reeves arrived in Oklahoma, put 5 Klansmen in shackles within hours, and then Bass rescued hostages, alone against 15 more, it was never just about arrests. It was about proving the future no longer belonged to white hoods. It belonged to the badge, to the law, and to men like Bass Reeves who defended it no matter the cost.